Not dealing with mammalian generalist pests, we're dealing with highly specialised natural enemies. Safety is always the top thing in our minds here. We want to do no harm. But on our side is that there's been a century of weed biocontrol done throughout the world. We've got a lot of information to look back on. And it's all available in this book here. And there's a website too, and you can go on and look up every single weed biocontrol agent that's ever been released around the world, including in your own countries. Some of you might be quite surprised to find what's in there. And as Michael said, 91 countries in the world have released deliberately at least one agent. There's been nearly 200 weeds have been targeted throughout the world, all sorts of things. From trees to vines to pasture plants to aquatic plants. Anything is fair game if it's a plant. And about 500 separate biocontrol agents have also been released. So it's quite a lot of stuff. And we know what's happened. It's all documented in this resource here. So what we know is if we use best practice for planning the testing that we do, we can predict what plants a biocontrol agent will eat. So we can predict if there's going to be any what we call non-target damage by our testing. And as you can imagine, 100 years ago when people first started doing this work, they didn't know what we know now about the testing. And so some agents were released that weren't tested in any adequate way by current standards. But even so, there hasn't been a whole lot of problems. And people have gone out and they have looked. So of all those 500 agents, only 4.8% are known to have population level non-target effects. And they could all have been predicted if you use best practice modern testing. So we can do this in a very safe way. So even though we did stuff 100 years ago when we were still in the cane toad and mongoose era, and not knowing so much about ecology and how things work, there haven't been a whole lot of disasters. There's been a whole lot of successes. And we're continuing to do research on this, and it's actually more about now not rejecting the agents which are actually going to be safe and useful, because what happens when you do the testing, sometimes you put them in a cage, in a less than natural situation, and in desperation they will try and feed on other plants because they're desperate and they're confused. And so you can get some results which sometimes suggest, maybe they might. And we're having to work now to be more sophisticated in our testing so we don't actually reject the good guys. But we can certainly single out the bad guys, and there are plenty which have been rejected because they're not safe. The other question people often ask, well, does it actually work? So again, what we know from all that big catalogue of all that information about all those projects, about 1/3 have been so successful you don't need any other control. You can just put the agents out and you can walk away and everything's good.
Is that for just one agent, or does that include programs with?
That's programs, so that can be one to multiple agents. Yeah, so it's not on the agent, it's on like a weed program level. About half are partially successful. So they might work in some habitats or in some places. Some of the lantana agents like dry conditions better, and they work really well if they're released in a dry place, don't do so well if it's in a wet place. And about 1/6 so far have no impact. So you put the agents out and they really don't do enough. But the interesting point here is that usually what happens is the funding runs out before the work is completed to develop a successful program. because you might need funding for 5 to 10 years or even longer if you're starting with a completely new weed that no one's ever worked on before, and it's really quite hard to get funding, and that goes on, as you know, beyond 2, 3, 4, 5 years even. And so the money runs out, the work isn't finished, and if we could have had the funding to do the work properly, you could have succeeded and got a successful program. So some of these, the reason those figures are lowish is because there's not enough money to complete the work. But again, by working with the agents in the Pacific that are already here, we can increase the levels of success because we can pick the ones that are in the top section. We're not going to pick the ones that we know aren't successful. We'll tell you not to bother with those. And again, we're continuing to do underpinning research to help us to pick the winners from all those different little insects and plant diseases out there. How do you pick which ones are going to be the ones that work and which ones aren't going to be so successful? Which ones are going to get parasitised? Which ones are going to get gobbled up by predators? All those kinds of things. We're learning more about those. So, where is it best? Where's the best time to use it? If you want rapid eradication of a weed, biocontrol is not the answer. You get in there and you do that by some other means. Biocontrol is for when you really can see that there's not going to be any other option. When other control is maybe possible but it's too expensive, it's too damaging, it's too difficult, then biocontrol, think biocontrol. And also it's really important that people accept it. There's no point in trying to do biocontrol if everybody is opposed and doesn't want to do it. But usually that's about the fact that they haven't had a chance to know the background and to know that it's safe and know that it works and know that it's not new. Because Michael sometimes calls it the forgotten tool. There was a whole lot of biocontrol agents released in the Pacific in the 1980s.
You call it the forgotten tool. Take the credit.
The forgotten tool. And they worked. And then everybody forgot about the weeds because they're no longer there. Everybody forgot they did biocontrol. And then when we talk to people now, they say, oh no, we don't do that. Because people have forgotten. I can't emphasise the importance of engaging with your communities and having conversations about this. And then you generally find when people weigh up the information, they usually come on board. But that's a process that takes time.